Yeah, I have.
The only time I don't trip over myself doing the pledge because when we're out here, there's more of a bottom than there. That's when one of these days I'm going down. I want to say too, so you you are fogging yourself up now, yeah. But it goes away once it equalizes.
So it was Thursday.
As the glasses warm up.
I put a tentative, I want to, yeah.
Yeah, I blocked it.
Science,
Yeah.
not a
I
good
know.
idea. Not a good idea.
All right, so we'll wait to hear. All right, please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So first up is our,
I'm sorry.
put a mask on. Discussion with the Irvington Volunteer Ambulance Corps. Please.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Hazard. Do all of you have a copy of the letter which we sent?
Yes, we do.
Because I will be referring to the charts that are attached to that letter. So it'd be useful for you to have those handy. Yes. Yeah.
That's what I thought. I just want to make sure we're referring to the same one.
We are. And there was.
November 8th.
Right, and there was a second piece of paper that I think I get right, exactly, perfect.
I got the letter electronic, but don't worry. I'm not-
Yeah.
I could give you the charts paper if you'd like.
I like
Okay.
electronic.
Okay.
I lose paper.
First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to have this work session with the Village of Irvington Board of Trustees. My name is David Graybeal. I'm a volunteer EMT. I'm a board member of the Irvington Volunteer Ambulance Corps. Next to me is Ellen Lewitt. She's the captain, longtime volunteer EMT and Irvington resident, and her mother was one of the founders of the Irvington Volunteer Ambulance Corps, which I'll refer to as IVAC throughout this. Our goal tonight is to articulate IVAC's need for financial assistance from the village. I'm going to start with a couple of points. We share a common goal. The village's goal, 24/7 ambulance service to citizens of Irvington with the shortest possible response time. And IVAC's goal is to provide 24/7 ambulance service, primarily serving the village of Irvington. And IVAC has a certificate of need for the provision of 911 emergency basic life support service to Irvington. Second point is capacity, not volume. And I will come back to this theme a few times. Emergency medical services is a capacity service, like the fire department. In a perfect world, there are no fires, but you still need a fire department just in case. And in a perfect world, there are no emergency calls, medical requirements, but the capacity to respond to emergencies is necessary, just in case. It's capacity, not volume. Second point I'd like to make, a few points actually about IVAC's economic model before we start looking at the charts. IVAC was founded and is operated as a not-for-profit. It is funded by the time given by volunteers, time is money, and charitable contributions, plus the revenue recovered from insurance. IVAC's operating costs are driven primarily by employment costs. Like most VACs, volunteer ambulance corps, IVAC has evolved into what is called the hybrid model. Free volunteer staff supplemented by paid EMTs and drivers. The hybrid model is essential because there are not enough qualified volunteers. The hybrid model increases the operating cost of the VAC due to salaries. Third point, IVAC's revenue is dependent on call volume and insurance recovery. IVAC charges for transports to hospitals, calls that do not require transport, so-called RMAs or refused medical assessment, generate no revenue. IVAC's call volume is dependent primarily on the needs of Irvington and secondarily the needs of neighboring jurisdictions that require mutual aid. Anticipated call volume is insufficient to generate revenue stream that is sufficient to cover IVAC operating costs. Now, if you could turn to the IVAC revenue expense income statement for the fiscal years 2018 to 2022. I want to make a few points about that. First, for purposes of operating revenue, I've excluded some restricted contributions, and that's important to note. IVAC has been the beneficiary of private contributions and grants sufficient to fund 2 new ambulances, which we have on order. We've also been the beneficiary of grant, or I guess a contribution to fund a Lucas CPR device, which is an automatic pumping device, and an EPCR, electronic patient care report tablet. Those funds are restricted in their gifts and are excluded from what we consider as operating revenue. 2 points about this chart. First, if you look at third-party billing across the top, running 204,000, 137,000, 250,000, 254,000, and 209,000. Throughout this 5-year period, operating revenue is quite variable, with revenue from ambulance calls ranging from 137,000 to a high of 254,000, a spread of 117,000. It's a big spread. This variability is directly related to the number of ambulance calls. Second point, and by contrast, operating costs are independent of call volume. During this, and look at the total line on expenses, 357,000, 335,000, 346,000, 333,000, 350,000. Operating costs are independent of call value. During the 5-year operating period, there's only a $25,000 range between the high and the low. Said another way, operating costs fund the capacity to respond to calls, but not the response to the call itself. Let's turn to.
I'm not going to interrupt you, but other than to say, do you want questions during the presentation, or you want us to wait till the end? Which would be fine, either way.
I'd be fine with the end. Sometimes what I say subsequently may answer a question that you're holding. So, but hold your question in case I don't get to it, and I'm happy to respond. Okay, if you could turn to the chart on IVAC changes in unrestricted cash position. And just to explain what this chart is, it basically takes how much unrestricted cash we had at the beginning of the fiscal year, how much we had at the end of the fiscal year, and says, did it go up or did it go down? And if you read the net change across the bottom for those 5 fiscal years, we had a loss of 73,000, a deficit of 10,000, which I will come back to, an increase of 35, an increase of 25, and a decrease of 32. Coming back to fiscal year 2019, that reduction of, looks like a deficit of only 10,000 is substantially smaller than the fiscal year operating deficit of 49,000. That was because of the forgiveness of a COVID PPP loan. So that's not really an accurate number. The second point here is that the fiscal year 2020 and 2021, as you will see when we talk about the next chart, are where we show a surplus, had substantially high call volume because the Dobbs Ferry back was out of business much of that time. So you might look at this chart and say, oh, average $11,000 a year over 5 years. That's not so bad. I look at it and I see operating costs of operating deficits of 73,000, 49,000 for 2019, 32,000 for 2022, and 3 of the 5 years, or an average loss of 51,000 for each of those years. And I think fiscal years 2020 and 2021 are entirely anomalous. Okay, if we could turn to the next page, which talks about call volume, you see this point illustrated. This chart shows total call volume for each of those 5 fiscal years. 456, 446, jumping up over 200, 746, almost 200 again, 180 to 724, coming back down in fiscal year 2022, 432. The chart divides that total into two categories. First, separating those which are calls to the Village of Irvington and those which are mutual aid calls. And then second division, those which were transports and those which were RMAs or canceled calls. If you look at the division between the Village of Irvington and mutual aid, you'll see that Village of Irvington calls relatively constant, 341, 351, 363, 365, down a little bit in fiscal year 2022 to 246. And that may be for reasons I'm not totally sure, but probably we were out of service for some of that time. The mutual aid though, 115.95, 383, high jump, 359, high jump, that's the Dobbs Ferry being out of business, 186. The norm is more like fiscal years 2018, 2019, not fiscal years 2020 and 2021. If you look at the division between transports where we are compensated and mutual aid, and RMAs and cancel calls where we are not, roughly, and this is consistent regardless whether on mutual aid calls or Village of Irvington calls, about a third of our calls are uncompensated because there's no physical transfer of the patient to a hospital. Let's turn to the next chart, which was the revenue collected per billed call. This information is collected from our billing company, Multimed. It's on a calendar year basis, not a fiscal year, so the call volume doesn't quite line up. Plus, these are billable calls, not total calls. But what it shows is for each of those fiscal years, the total number of calls submitted for billing, what was billed after taking to allowance what insurance allows you to bill, notwithstanding the nominal bill. So Medicare, for example, Medicaid, you were allowed a lot less than the nominal bill. What amount was actually collected, what amount remains receivable, the portion of the amount of the bill that was written off, and the average amount collected per billable call. If you look at the bottom line, what we collect for our billable call ranges, and it varies the year, but low 500s to high 400s. And in the outer years, 2022 and 2023 to date, those numbers are going to come up as those receivables get collected and they get factored in. I'm going to turn next to a chart, which was the supplemental chart that you received. It talks a little bit about our staffing. This chart took a look at our schedules for the period 1/2023 through 10/21/2023. We divide our schedule into 4-week blocks. Each block has shifts of 12 hours. So it's 1900, 1900, 1700, 14 shifts per week, 56 shifts per 4-week period. A shift requires 2 staff, at least a driver, at least an EMT. And so if we don't have one of those, then we may be out of service. This chart breaks down in each of these periods of the 56 shifts, how many were staffed by volunteers, how many were staffed by paid EMTs, and how many of these shifts were we out of service. It's not an attractive chart. It's embarrassing because we like to be in service 24/7. Some of these months we were out of service 6, 9, or 8 times out of 56. Some of these months we were out of service 28, 22, 19 times of the 56. That is unacceptable to us and should be unacceptable to the village. This is highly dependent upon what staff we have, and then from the volunteer side, highly dependent upon vacations. Take that worst month, 7/30 to 8/26. I was on vacation for 2 months. I share a shift with Heather on Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm out, but we don't have the spending reserve for a substitute. The shift goes uncovered. I come back from vacation. She goes on vacation. I share shifts with her Mondays and Tuesdays. There's nobody to cover for her. She's also on Fridays. We were way down on the number, like 7.5 volunteer shifts in that whole month, simply because we had a vacation, we didn't have the spending reserves. So why is volunteerism down? That's that free contribution, translates to cash, but free contribution of time. Well, basic life support service requires a New York State licensed EMT. To become an EMT requires a 3-month course, passage of written practical exams. This requirement is a significant barrier to volunteers. Shifts require the ability to drop all other activities and respond when the pager goes off. This requires volunteers to be employed locally with an accommodating employer, or live locally with no daytime obligations, e.g. a retired house spouse with no children responsibilities. Two-income families leave little time for volunteering. Pre-college and college age volunteers may plug a few holes here and there, but are really unreliable for regular shifts. IVAC is a good example. Most of our active volunteers are over age 65, and we have 3 active volunteers over age 70. So why are paid EMTs in short supply? Well, EMTs are paid generally low wage. It's stressful work, and it leads to very high attrition rates with young EMTs moving on to other careers. Many in healthcare, doctors, lawyers, PAs, nurses, are outside healthcare. Being an EMT is not a career choice. And there's a lot of documentation of that and concern in the EMS community. How do we keep our EMTs? IVAC pays our EMTs $18 per hour with no benefits. This rate is on the low end among VACs in Westchester County. Most agencies pay $20 per hour plus. But even the $20 per hour plus, that's not a very significant wage. So IVAC faces a conundrum, weighing the payment of higher wage to attract EMTs and build capacity versus incurring costs that will not be covered by any change in call volume. It's attention. So what's normal? Now here I've got a supplemental sheet which adds a column to, and I'll pass it, let me just pass this one out. The supplemental sheet that adds a column to what was attached to the letter. Otherwise, it's essentially the same, but easy to follow. Until that gets around. Okay. So what's normal for IVAC? How many calls will IVAC have? How much will it pay its EMTs? What's the effect on the bottom line? Making assumptions about historical donations, training and operating costs, percentage of total calls that are billable, historical revenue per billable call, the net results can vary dramatically. First column, with 450 calls, no pay increase for its EMTs, IVAC, you could predict this $96,000 annual loss. And this call volume at 450 calls, I think is a tad optimistic. With 725 calls, like those couple of years where we had the Dobbs Ferry out of business, IVAC just breaks even. This is a very unrealistic assumption about call volume. We're not in that world anymore. And with 400 calls, and this is the column I added, and a modest increase of EMT pay to $20 per hour, and assuming 24/7 staffing, the anticipated deficit approaches $163,000. My best guess, my biggest worry, and what keeps me up at night, is the future will look like the third column, with reduced call volume and increased staffing cost. IVAC's operating deficit will rise quickly, and its current cash cushion will evaporate. If I'm right, IVAC insolvency could arrive inside of 2 years. This is a systemic problem, EMS problem, that has affected other agencies and is now affecting IVAC. It is a problem that we cannot manage our way out of, at least not alone. So we're here asking help to continue our mission to provide EMS service to Irvington. Specifically, IVAC needs a revenue stream that is independent of call volume and allows IVAC to provide the EMS capacity that the village and IVAC want. Many Westchester VACs have some form of financial support from their primary jurisdiction. Ossining VAC has a tax district. It's very unusual actually in Westchester, but very successful in funding OVAC. Dobbs Ferry VAC, we understand, gets a monthly stipend from the village of Dobbs Ferry. Terrytown VAC, we understand, receives a monthly stipend from the village of Terrytown based on the number of RMAs, refused medical non-transports, which it has. And Hastings is associated with its fire department. Now the Terrytown TVAC model, we understand they get $900, specifically $900 per call where the patient refuses transport, not to exceed $10,000 per month. TVAC might earn more with the refusal than it would from transporting a patient. This reverses, in our view, the normal bias in favor of transport, whereas a matter of protocol, refusals require a careful assessment of patient condition and capacity, independent of economic incentive. Now, footnote, I know that IVAC is incented to transport because we get nothing for RMAs, but I think that is consistent with the protocol, which I think favors transport, and the patient really needs to demonstrate capacity in order to refuse. A simple approach that the village could take is simply to cover our deficit. I guess this is something similar to what Dobbs Ferry does. The village could pay IVAC's operating deficit not to exceed some agreed amount, say $12,000 per month or $148,000 per year. The village could schedule payments monthly. IVAC could keep a running account with a true up at the end of the year, and any amount paid in excess of an operating deficit would be credited against payments in the next year. Some scheme of that could easily work. Another scheme that I think could be entertained is where the village pays IVAC to provide EMS capacity. The village could pay IVAC a fixed amount for each shift IVAC is open, say $200, which at 14 shifts per week times 52 weeks per year equates to an annual maximum amount of $145,000. Assuming IVAC is in service 75% of the time, the annual payment would be $109,200. Payment could be made monthly in arrears or prospectively based on an estimate subject to a true-up. This approach, I think, aligns the census. The village is purchasing EMS capacity, and IVAC is incentivized to find a way to staff its shifts. Regardless of approach, IVAC needs financial assistance to remain a viable EMS provider to the village of Irvington. That concludes my prepared remarks, and certainly open to any kinds of questions or discussion we have.
You were all go, so you
Yeah,
go.
I went back through my notes here, but I guess my first question is, are your revenues limited by the number of staffed shifts? And in other words, in years when you've had lesser revenues, is it directly tied to the result of your inability to staff these shifts, or just the result of a lesser number of calls in a given year?
With the exception of this past 9 months, where I think we've been out of service much more than we want. In the prior years, we've actually been in service a much greater percentage. And I think the reduction of revenue is directly related to call volume, not related to being in service. That's point one. Point two is a lot of our out of service time is at night as opposed to day. And if you look at the balance of when calls occur, most calls occur during the day and not at night. So providing 24/7 service, even if we're not in service some nights, there are no calls. And so we save money in a perverse kind of way by not having to pay anybody to be there. But there was no capacity to service a call if one came in. And our paid per diems, for the most part, are the night crew. There are some exceptions. We have a couple of volunteers which will drive at night and occasionally be the EMT at night. But the vast majority of our evening or overnight shifts are covered by paid EMTs.
So perhaps I'm asking the same question a different way. But
Okay.
if the village is giving you funds and you can hire more paid personnel, does that improve the calls, or are the calls a fixed number period that you have determined from the records of the communities around us, how many people have gone out, in fact, that you could have handled if you were staffed? So
we would
to
handle.
be very direct, would the revenues go up if we were allowing you to staff these on some of the unstaffed? I understand your point about the night, some of the unstaffed slots in the schedule.
Some revenues would go up. That is true. I think the numbers would look more like,
Page
I would take you to where we show the total number of calls. When I go fiscal year 2018, 456, fiscal year 2019, 446, fiscal year 2020, fiscal year 2022, 432. I think those are pretty normalized numbers with us being staffed pretty much all the time. And the Irvington numbers going across that, 341, 351, 360, 365, those are pretty consistent Irvington numbers. So there would not be much, if we were staffed 24/7, we will pick up a few more calls because we have missed a few. Basically, if you look at those years, 2018 through 2021, I think those are good numbers to think about how many calls you should expect in a normalized year within Irvington. Outside of Irvington, the normalized, I think, is down into the low 100s. And we've always had a high number of mutual aid calls. The village, VAX, Dobbs Ferry, us, Terrytown, we support each other. And if Terrytown's on a call and the second call comes in the Dobbs Ferry, we will go. If Terrytown's on a call and a second call comes into Terrytown, we will go, and vice versa. If we're on a call and a second call comes into Irvington, Dobbs or Terrytown will cover here. So I think these are fairly good numbers to, as a projection of what it will look like in the future.
Okay, can I take you back to what is your page 5 of your letter, IVAC revenues and expenses?
IVAC revenues,
Page 5.
or just give me the title of the
Yeah.
5.
no, it's a different page number. Than
Oh, sorry, IVAC revenue and expenses.
Yeah, sure.
Page
The-
1.
sure.
There's a writing, but
Oh, this one.
Yeah, got it. I got it.
What's in the ambulance cost? Is that's not the capital cost?
No, that ambulance cost is primarily employment. That's primarily our EMT's cost.
So that's personnel
Yeah.
costs?
Yeah.
David, so I can ask, so with additional funds, I'm trying to understand, like, maybe kind of to John's point, like how that changes the staffing analysis, because, when you have like, here's the possible futures, like I'm trying to understand with the additional money, how does that, it doesn't seem like that would increase the number of volunteers. I
It's
guess,
not, money does not increase the number of volunteers, that is for sure.
But will increase the paid EMTs, or is it just
I think it
the
will,
rate has to go up to get?
I think it will increase our ability to attract paid EMTs.
Okay, so more paid EMTs, possibly at a higher rate, and then the goal will be to cover more shifts, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Not that we're saying we wouldn't want to attract more volunteers
Sure, yeah.
to cover more shifts.
No problem. Now, it's a lot of challenges.
Volunteer time is money,
Right.
and very quantifiable.
when I was looking through first the numbers, but then the second thing that you sent with the specific staffing, two things jumped out at me,
Okay.
and it led me to ask you a question, but I want to set it up first. So one thing I noticed is there are 9 volunteers to staff 24 shifts a week, right? Is that am I reading that correctly from this?
Just
There's 24 shifts, right? There's 14 shifts a week.
14
2 people on a shift.
and
Right.
2 people on a shift.
So it's 4 people a day.
Right, so 4 people a day, 7 days a week, so it's 20 people a week, or 20 people shifts a week, and you have 9 volunteers, right? So that seems to be one problem right off the bat, because you have, in this period, you have, for every 1 volunteer working, you have 2 plus paid people working, right? So it's 51 versus 23%. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
And so that's the first thing that jumped out at me. And the second thing that jumped out at me, and your explanation today helped, was in 2020 and 2021 were the 2 years that got a lot of revenue because there was no Dobbs Ferry, so you picked up a lot of outside of Irvington calls. So what I thought, and there might be reasons why this wouldn't work, but I want to hear your take on it is, so would there be any value in exploring a merger with Dobbs Ferry, Because in that sense, you'd have more people, right? You know, the volunteers of the two different villages. And in the years that you were serving both villages, there was enough cost to bring enough money to pay for the service. So would that work? Is there a possibility of that working on a more permanent basis?
The short answer is probably yes. The longer answer is it's complicated. It can be complicated. I don't want to put this. I want to be sort of accurate.
A lot involved with the state.
Yeah, there's a regulatory element which I don't fully understand as to how we could, as a matter of legality, if I put it that way, coordinate our schedules. In concept, I think the idea of an integrated EMS service that for the river towns, and let's not focus on Dobbs Ferry. Let's focus on.
Well, I was starting small.
I know, but think of it conceptually. You know, you got Terrytown, you got Ardsley, you got a lot of small VACs, which all have an issue that their call volume may not be sufficient. Some integration of those VACs in a rationalized way could make a lot of sense. And I'd say, as a conceptual matter, we're entirely open to that. That I don't see as a short-term, near-term solution. I see that as a longer-term project that could take a couple of years to pull off. So that's sort of one observation about the point. Two, we have thought about, well, gee, why, just starting small with Dobbs Ferry, why couldn't we just call them up and say, we don't have anybody Monday, you cover Monday, we'll cover Tuesday night, you cover Wednesday, we cover Thursday, something like that. We're open to that approach if that could be permissible with the county and all the regulatory folks that allow that. There was a downside to that, and there was certainly a downside when we were covering EMS calls in Dobbs Ferry, and it's a point I made right at the beginning. Irvington wants 24/7 EMS service with the shortest possible response time. And we have to be careful that we're not spreading or lengthening response times because we're spreading the capacity too thin.
David, to that point, do we have any idea what effect on response time the 26% of out of service time has?
I'm sure it has an adverse effect on response time, because what will happen, when we're out of service, we call that we're out of service. So 60 Control, which is the dispatching agency for EMS in the county, knows that we're out of service, and the police know we're out of service. So if an Irvington call comes in, which 911 goes to the police department will notify 60 Control, and 60 Control will dispatch, won't go through us, will dispatch a or mutual aid ambulance. So it could be coming from Dobbs Ferry, it could be coming from Terrytown, if they're in service. Now, there is always this problem that once you call, so there's no delay in the first call. There might be delay in the second if they're out on a call. And the flip side has certainly happened when Dobbs Ferry gets called for a call and they're out and dispatched. They get dispatched first for a Dobbs Ferry call. 10 minutes go by and they haven't responded to it. Then we get called. So now we've added 10 minutes to the response time. We jump in the ambulance and go. And if we can't respond, then somebody else responds. So there is a cascade effect which will lengthen the response time. If we call ourselves out of service, that's shortened, that first piece of that. But there could be some, and of course, then there's just the physical distance of, if you have to respond to North Irvington and you're coming from Dobbs Ferry, it's a little bit of distance. It's just like if we try to respond to something in Terrytown and we've got to get through all those lights, at the intersection of 119.
Instruction.
It's actually why I said just Irvington and Dobbs Ferry. Because I figured keep it, if you guys were able to handle that when you did it, and you figure the max distance from the most far away point in Dobbs to Irvington, you start adding other villages, it starts to be,
Yeah, we do a lot of mutual aid calls to all the way through Dobbs Ferry to Cabrini Nursing Home and St. Christopher School and Children's Village.
And those are all pretty far.
Those are all pretty far on the other side of Dumpster.
Question.
I'm sorry.
I guess my question is, I'm listening and I'm wondering about the viability of a volunteer service that has 9 volunteers. And you said like a lot of your members are older. How do you, well, how do you, I guess 9 seems to be a very small number, especially for what you have to do and what you have to cover. So sort of, I guess my concern is like, how does that look in terms of planning? Because are you getting new volunteers, or are we looking to sort of staff this fully by paid EMTs? Because that number to me is
No,
concerning.
we are looking for volunteers. The best entry into that is to become a driver first, because that does not require becoming a licensed EMT. You have to go some training, you have to get CPR certified. It's a lot easier to do than to go through training with an EMT. And that's a good entry point to being a volunteer. We have a couple of younger volunteers, which are very enthusiastic. 2 are sitting here tonight. Raise your hands back there. And they contribute a lot to the staffing. But we also have some older volunteers. Heather's right here. She does 3 shifts a week. I do 2 shifts a week. I spend all my Mondays and Tuesdays over there. And I don't even live in Irvington. And we've got, who else we got over here? We got a Wednesday volunteer over here. And we got another Wednesday volunteer in the back who are Irvington residents and respond. So we have a committed group, and it's a pretty experienced group. 3 of us are medics, even though we're practicing at the BLS level in Irvington. And so we're committed to providing 911 service. Can we do more? Sure, we're trying to attract more. We run our EMT class 3 times a year, and we often get 1, maybe 2 volunteers coming out of that. They're often the young people, and they may be with us for a little while. I said in my comments that I think young folk are not reliable for regular stated service, especially if they're going off to college. We may get them for a few places here and there, but we have had a few like that. I took the EMT class over at IVAC, and with me was a young man who went to Irvington High School, and he'd come back from college, taken a couple years off, and he was a steady volunteer for 2 years. So we're constantly looking and trying to attract folks. But attracting volunteers is I don't want to sell it as a successful venture. It is a tough thing to do, to attract someone who's going to stay. And most committed volunteers are the ones who are at the end of their working life, their paid working life, or into their retired working life. And so they've got time to do it. That's my situation.
I can add, we are not the only agency that faces all these problems. This is a systemic problem, not only in all of New York State, but across the entire United States. And after COVID, it was estimated that all the states saw a 50% reduction in their EMTs for numerous reasons. They're trying to figure out how to correct that, but so far, no go.
Let me make one comment about our paid EMTs. I think we have a very high qualified group. A lot of them, for most paid EMTs, our situation is what we'd call their B job. They've got some other EMT job, full-time, and they're coming to work for us, and they can work a couple nights a week. And it's nice because they can come and they can sleep and maybe have 1 call and get through. But they're very experienced. We have EMTs with FDNY experience, Mount Sinai experience. We have a lot of very experienced EMTs. We do not have fresh minted EMTs, and frankly, we don't have the capacity to train someone fresh out of an EMT class to say, hey, come ride and turn them loose. We don't want to do that. We don't have the time to train them. So most of our EMTs are actually quite mature and very experienced, and we're proud of that.
To add to that, when you do get a new EMT out of the class, Taking an EMT class is kind of like going to elementary school and learning your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. The real training comes in when you ride with an experienced crew for quite a period of time to go on calls and learn how and when to apply everything you were taught in class. For some people, that could take up to a year, because if they're only riding one time a week and that day they didn't get any calls, then they get no experience. So sometimes it can take a couple of years before a new EMT would get enough experience to actually be able to, what we refer to as, tech a call on their own.
One of our sources of, recent sources for EMTs has been, I would say, younger individuals who are looking to get patient experience in order to apply to PA school. We had at least 3 EMTs who spent a lot of time with us, went on a lot of calls, and were very good. But it was all in that transition. They're heading off to another career that's going to be more lucrative and more permanent for them. And that's a non-typical.
So can I ask about Greenberg EMS?
Sure.
They're not a volunteer service, correct?
Correct.
And do our taxes pay towards Greenberg's EMS service, and are they obligated to provide us a level of service?
What I understand, I don't know what Irvington taxes pay. I'm actually I'm actually a resident of unincorporated Greenberg, so I'm interested in that question. But what I understand for Irvington is that Irvington gets advanced life support, ALS service support from the town of Greenberg. There's usually a fly car that's a Ford Bronco with a paramedic in it who is stationed somewhere, resides in his car during his shift or her shift. And if a 911 call comes in, the BLS ambulance will respond and the ALS fly car will respond, or not if it's not needed. Lots of calls are not needed.
Which we do pay for that with our taxes.
And I think that is the answer
We
to that
do
question.
pay
I
for
think
that
the
with our
ALS service is
taxes.
paid. The BLS service is not paid for. I pay for that over in unincorporated Greenberg. And so if I call 911 from my home, I get a Greenberg
Police ambulance.
I get a Greenberg police ambulance.
Greenberg is unique in the fact that it is, I think it might have changed now, but it was the only police department in the country that actually ran EMS out of its police department. That's somewhat changed a little bit. There's others now that do it, but Greenberg's EMS runs solely under the jurisdiction of the police department over there. So if you live in Greenberg proper, as I'll refer to it, yes, you pay taxes for that, for your police department, and that also covers your EMS. Larry, you may remember when we put in that fly park program many years ago, Greenberg was always good enough to, if we really needed it, send over a paramedic from Greenberg if there was some horrible atrocity that occurred. And over time, more people moved in and calls became more serious, and I'm sure you recall this, that it was put to a vote of the public and everything, that a very small tax increase. I mean, it was almost minimalistic, because the 5 villages of Hastings, Dobbsbury, Irvington, Terrytown, Ardsley, and Elmsford, 6, all agreed to it. So it was such a nominal amount of money on your tax bill, it was almost unnoticeable. That would cover us having a fly car to respond to those 6 villages, 1 fly car that's servicing the 6 villages.
So let me contrast that to Ossining. Ossining is an ALS provider, advanced life support. And so whatever jurisdiction Ossining covers, they're providing BLS and ALS coverage. And they have ambulances, and their ALS is usually through fly cars. Scarsdale, which is village and town Scarsdale, is an ALS agency. It's a VAC, but it provides ALS service, and it staffs a medic 24/7, 2 medics during the day, and 1 at night, all paid. Eastchester is an ALS service. It services the whole town of Eastchester. And it staffs 2 medics during the day and 1 at night, and provides BLS and ALS service. And also just recently undertook a contract with the Village of Pelham to provide BLS and ALS service to the Village of Pelham.
So Larry, I don't know if you want to review a little bit. I know there have been discussions in the last couple of years between mayors and village administrators discussing this river town's problem. And clearly there has not been a solution, so I'm not sure, how much we can really get out of that, but.
Well, yeah, certainly it's been discussed a lot over the years. The mayors have been very much in tune with the problem, amongst all the villages. What I would say, and this is somewhat my view of it, but I think others at these meetings would agree that it's been difficult to get 6 villages, and actually 7 if you throw in Sleepy Hollow, because they meet with us as well. It's been difficult to get 6 or 7 villages to agree on anything. But I don't mean that in a broad way. I mean, it's very much the fact that each village is in a different situation. It turns out you're mentioning Dobbs Ferry and Tarrytown because they're most similar to our situation. If you go down to Hastings, that's run by their fire department. It's a completely different situation than us. Elmsford also is run by their fire department, completely different situation. Moving on to Sleepy Hollow, they have a different situation, for example. So, and Ardsley's a similar model, but Ardsley happens to be flush with volunteers. So they don't have, the financial issues today that they may have had 10 years ago, for example. So things change. And what that does is that means that those communities look at the problem differently. And the solution is not going to be a one single solution amongst all the villages. It's become painfully obvious to someone like me who's been sitting here for years watching this, that you're never going to get anyone on the same page. So it's really gotten to the point, again, from my view, it's gotten to the point where the solution needs to be handled by Irvington, or to your point, by Irvington and, maybe talking about Dobbs Ferry, maybe talking about Tarrytown, maybe talking about a solution that addresses nighttime versus daytime. I don't know, all these different things that people far smarter than me know about. But the solution is not going to be, let's wait for Greenberg to do something, or let's wait for all the villages to agree on something. That's just my observation in this whole thing. And so we need to deal with this now here locally, whether that means in conjunction with 1 or 2, but sitting back and waiting for, everyone to agree for a town-wide solution or even a county-wide solution has been talked about. It's that maybe that's long-term, but it's not certainly not short-term. That's the best I can say.
And I purposely just limited to Dobbs Ferry because I did not have it been a town-wide solution.
Right, but, the mayors were hopeful. It sounds like a perfect thing to be solved amongst multi-jurisdictions. It's just not so easy.
And as David mentioned earlier, there are many, many, many state and county regulations in terms of mergers. And it could take a very long time to, even if we all sat here tonight and said we wanted to, it's a lot involved. Because the county has their own rules and the state of New York has theirs. So it's not that easy, but doesn't mean it's impossible. But we need something looking short-term for the moment to stay operational.
But it seems that even if it took a long time to formally merge, it seems like you guys have kind of already worked out, I don't want to call it a workaround because that makes it seem more not as efficient as it is, but like that you've already had a situation where if you go off service, they're the ones who are going to cover it, you could work that out.
To be clear about that, we're entirely open to that, but we have not implemented anything, and I don't think we've had anything that approaches productive discussions about that.
That has to get approved by the
I'm
county.
saying you could try to have
With
a formal
what-
agreement before a merger.
Right, but with what Dave brought up, there are also regulations within the county through DES that, for example, if we're not in service, we notify our PD that we are not in service from this time to this time. We also notify Westchester County DES 60 Control. We are out of service for XYZ reason. Ambulances broke down, or we don't have an EMT tonight, whatever. When we are back in service, we do notify them. Some other agencies from time to time don't, so then you wouldn't know who's in service and who's not. We always make sure we notify, because we don't want to see a delay in care to any resident who calls for help.
Right, I don't want to belabor the point, but what I was saying was you could get together with Dobbs-Ferry before any kind of formal merger and just say, hey, let's handle things this way. You could kind of arrange to have coverage for each other and build that into a system, and if it works, the next step could be to pursue something more formal in the way to merger.
You'd still have to go through the county though.
Even just to have an arrangement, like we're gonna go off and you're gonna cover this?
Yeah,
Okay.
you'd have to let them know because they hold all the cards for the jurisdictional mutual aid that has been set in place by New York and the county. For, yes, we're all required to do mutual aid. We can't say, hey, we don't want to. You have no option. So if we did make something like that, we would have to go to the county and get their approval to say, hey, can we just
Coordinate our schedules.
coordinate our schedules to do this? And they would have to, we went through a similar thing when they were building the Ashford Avenue Bridge. If you all remember that, it was closed down for like 2 years. And IVAC responds to all calls on the Parkway, pretty much from just before the bridge all the way up to the 287 or 87 exit off the Sawmill. And it came to, we had requested that Ardsley could handle the north side of the Sawmill and IVAC could handle the south side. Reason for that is because a lot of the calls that were on northbound, we couldn't get to. We would have to find a way to take all the back roads through Dobbs Ferry or somehow get over the Ashford Avenue Bridge, go south on 9A down to whatever, Lawrence Street or something, get on the Sawmill, which if there's an accident, now the traffic's all backed up. There was a delay in getting an ambulance there because it would take us 20, 25, 30 minutes to, even though we leave right away, to get to a scene. Eventually, we had a meeting with the county and they finally approved for Ardsley to pick up the northbound calls and IVAC to pick up the southbound calls, because we have access through Mountain Road and Cyrus Field.
Well, perhaps, and obviously we're gonna take all this, we have to think about it
Thank you.
and how we approach this. I'm not cutting off any other questions, because I actually have a few, but at the point at which we're having a follow-up conversation, maybe we could talk about the possibility of working with another community a little more in depth. I understand there are regulatory hurdles and you need the county to participate. So maybe that's on us to get somebody to pay attention and move a little quicker. And I know we've got in January another meeting with the mayor, so maybe we pull somebody aside. No commitments on your behalf, obviously, but it's just to, make sure that somebody from the top down is paying attention.
Actually, you're saying exactly what I think is required to get VACs to interact with each other in a productive way.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm digressing slightly, but I should have said this first. Thank you to everybody who's volunteering and or serving, even if you're paid in this capacity. This community very much appreciates what you're doing. And even if we're asking you some questions that might perturb you, we're doing it for a reason. We need to understand your business model and the viability going forward, so we know what we can do to help and to kind of size that. So to that point, can you tell me a little bit about your fundraising? And I want to hear, and if there's some things you don't want to talk about publicly, that I understand, but I'm assuming you have sort of an annual, since I send something in, an annual, mailing that
We do.
that collects fundraising, but you also obviously have been very successful, at least according to the footnote here, in terms of raising for what I'll call capital equipment. And how is that distinguished from the, I'll call it annual, if it is annual
Well,
fundraising.
the specific amounts we raised, one was a kind of an out of the blue challenge contribution. Here's a large sum of money, and we want it to pay for an ambulance. It's from an anonymous donor, but we challenge you to raise comparable significant contribution from another source. We took up that challenge and we got a grant from Phelps Corporation. Phelps Foundation made an
Community
application to
corporation.
them, and we got a grant for $125,000 from them, which picked up the first of it, the bulk of what was required for the 2 new ambulances. Then we did a specific local fundraising solicitation, separate from the annual end of the year fundraising, specifically for the ambulance. That raised another close to $50,000. The numbers in here, I don't have it off the top of my head. That was all designed to fund the 2 ambulances because our current ambulances are very old. The grant that was given to us for the Lucas actually came from an individual as a private donation. I think it was because of situation she had with her someone in the family.
Mother.
Okay, thank you.
In New Jersey, though, that did not happen here.
And after some conversation, advanced sufficient money to buy the Lucas, which is a very nice piece of equipment to have. And then from one of the local churches, he applied for a grant, and that paid for the EPC. It's in here.
Okay. The Lucas is $20,000 plus. Medical equipment's very expensive.
So those were those specific fundraising attempts.
And you're not going to be able to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
Do you think there could be volunteers? Some people are getting paid for doing the service, but so fundraising is, I assume, over and above whatever you're doing when you're trying to put a mailing together. Could there be is it possible there is a more efficient way to do the fundraising, just to bring more in, if you will?
I don't know. It's a short answer.
Right.
I see VAX. I get a fund mailing from Ardsley. Everyone does the mailing. I see the one from Scarsdale. Being unincorporated Greenberg between the two.
I mean, clearly when there is I'll call it a piece of equipment, it's got a little more pizzazz to
Sure.
it than somebody, and it's you've got a matching grant that can, I'm not here to analyze what you're doing for fundraising, but yeah,
I think you're right. It's very easy, relatively speaking. It's easier to attract money for a specific piece of equipment. It's much harder, and I think riskier from a business perspective to try to cover operating costs with charitable contributions.
I
Especially
assume a lot of people that give have been visited by, or
Visited
some people,
constantly,
by
right,
your services,
right.
so.
Yeah, go ahead.
Obviously, I've been here with VAC for decades. I talk to a lot of people in town, very well known. And the village has changed over the years. You get a lot of the older folks who were here for a long time. They either passed away or moved away, and we get a lot of new residents. And when we do a mailing, I would say we only get 10% of the people back to us. To point, I talk to a lot of people, and we tried to get the word out, but somehow it just doesn't get through. Most of the people who live here in the village firmly believe that their taxes pay for our EMS, and they don't at all. And because they come from other cities or other places where their taxes did pay for fire and EMS and everything else, they don't realize that their taxes don't cover us at all. So that's, maybe we'd get more donations if somehow we could get that out to the public. And we have tried through letters and mailers and talking, and it kind of just doesn't go through a lot of times.
So I think for us, we need a little bit of time to digest this, and thank you very much. The materials are really great and very helpful. It's possible we'll have some follow-up questions, but we can certainly send them by email.
Sure, we're happy to respond.
Okay.
And thank you for your time.
We thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to meet with you. And on behalf of everyone here who is volunteers with our agency,
Thank you all.
thank you also.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job. How's your son? Is Addison going? Pardon? Is Addison going? No, of course not. Oh, no.
Well, you know what?
All right, next up is update on the proposed changes to the architectural review. And we've got lots of correspondence on it. So. Do you have a plan for an update?
We're not going, no, I mean, there's nothing attached to the agenda. We're not going through a log, we're not.
Got it. Okay,
I think
so-
the goal of this item was to assess the board's reaction to whatever you may have heard from correspondence that's been submitted, any other interactions you've had, and to try to understand which direction you'd like to go with this in terms of how we get it considered.
Okay.
That's really it.
I'll give you.
Our liaison?
Actually, yeah, if you would like to go first, you
Oh.
can.
I don't know.
I think we're gonna be of like mind, so.
Right, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we got obviously a lot of public comment that there was an interest in getting more involved and maybe looking at even a broader scope of like the full building process end to end. I know that there's a group, I don't know if Randy, you're here for them, or Jeff, that came with a proposal for structuring, you know, a board, or not a board, a committee, and different phases like that. So I think, I don't know, yeah, I mean, that's something we can talk about some of the details there and next steps there. I was sort of curious, I think I spoke to some of you about this before, but I mean, I think that's great, we should definitely do that. I wonder too, though, like I know that ARB already proposed some maybe short-term fixes that sounded like they would have a benefit to, you know, speeding up the process for some members. I think these maybe came from Randy, I don't know if that's right, but you know, going to a building department review for things in the rear of the house, skipping the ARB review for HOAs that already have their own review, and then reworking the solar panel laws in different phases. So I'm not sure if it makes sense to do those as something that I think will definitely, I mean, ARB, correct me if I'm misrepresenting, but I think you said that these will have you know, speed up the process and make it better for a lot of people. And I wonder if there's an approach to, you know, making some short-term fixes now while continuing to get more involvement and looking at a more comprehensive plan. So no, I know I don't mean to put you on the spot, Larry, but I remember we spoke one time, or maybe you mentioned in a meeting about, the solar panel laws and how there's some issues we have with some grants or environmental things we've been looking at, and an opportunity to sort of standardize those as a totally separate thing anyway. Sounds like there's a lot of models where we could move to make that easier and more standardized with what other things we're doing.
Well, I mean, I'm not,
Sure, yeah.
I'm not gonna go through the details of the solar panel law, but I
Right.
know that we have some complications in our law that are not present in other communities' laws, especially as it relates to appearance and all that. I'm not talking about state code issues, of course.
Right.
So I think I've said that in the past, that those should be reconsidered.
Right.
But, I mean, if you keep them, that's fine, but.
One, I think the sort of workarounds that you were describing came from a note from the entire ARB.
Right.
My personal approach on this would probably be like yours, to try to do some of these interim steps, or at least look at them while we are engaged in the process of sort of analyzing whether there needs to be a long-term fix, and if so, what is that long-term fix? I know that up until now, we've developed a proposed law with some alternatives that would change the nature of the ARB to, I think, ACC, was it?
AAC.
AAC, sorry, thank you. And the two problems I believe that we were trying to solve are speed of execution and the ability to get some experts onto the ARB.
The third one, it's making things go in the right order, in other words.
Yes.
People going through the entire process, getting to the end, and then getting bounced back to the beginning.
Got it.
Right,
So maybe schedule it just for a short.
yeah. Or
Workflow. Okay. So, as I said, I would be happy to pursue some of the low-hanging fruit, if we want to describe it that way, for those things that were suggested by ARB, and then to take a more measured look. And I know some of the letters have suggested we set up a committee to analyze that. I'm happy to do that. We want to open it up a little more broadly. I know, and I really appreciate that. I think one of the letters gave us some sort of folks who are ready to volunteer, which really is great. But I still would get the word out and let other folks who, if they're really interested in the process, participate.
I like the committee members who have gone through the process, or who are going through the process, or will be going through the process.
Yeah.
Because this is one thing, it's so funny to me, is because I never would have guessed this, but when I started serving 2 years ago, if you would ask me on my first day, like, what are people gonna most come to me about when I'm walking down the street, I would not have guessed the planning board, or that was so out of me, out of my, and I have to say that is so far and above the thing that people, it's like, you're on the board, that's right, I wanna tell you about, it's either something with the building department or something with the architectural review board. I'm telling you, it's like a 10-to-1 ratio to that, to any other issue you can think of, not the bond, not the leaf blowers, which seem to be, but no, it is.
Sorry,
This is the thing that most people are upset about. So my feeling is, I've said this from 2 years ago, and we discussed like the small things like the play sets and the sheds and everything, is that anything that makes the process easier for the homeowner, that obviously doesn't impact anything important environmentally. Mark Gillian did a great job of educating me specifically, but the board, I think, about the difference between like the coverage rules, which are to protect for drainage and the environment, is different than things that are meant for, for the way things look, which are two very different issues. Obviously, the historic district has to be considered, and that has to be, an important part of it as well. But yeah, so I want to make sure that people go through the process are part of this, because I think those voices need to be heard, because I keep hearing them.
The question is, how do you recruit people who had a bad experience?
Yeah.
I'm
It doesn't have to
overstating
go
it.
backwards. I don't want to stack the committee. I just want people who've been through the process.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
but-
that's
but
fair.
So not even about stacking the committee, because I think I get a lot of just discussion about this same issue. To me, it's the same problem. Building department is one I get a lot, some with the ARB, but I do think that these are processes that it's sort of difficult, and we have to kind of think about the committee, because you have to have an environment where people feel comfortable being just honest about their experiences, right? And it may not be so easy to be honest, if you have a committee that feels very strongly, which is understandable, right, about the work that they do. So it's hard to put people who do the job with people who might be criticizing what's happening in the city.
Perhaps you can do that by getting architects on the board, on the committee, because they will have presumably represent multiple clients, and it's not one person stepping up and saying.
There was at least one architect on your list,
Yeah.
right? Two,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I said at least, I knew there was at least one, but there's two, that's.
Yeah, maybe there can be a difference between getting input from people who go through the process versus
Right.
people on the working committee, so maybe there's a way to anonymously collect feedback that can be, the committee can work through.
But it's hard to work with anonymous feedback alone because there's no give and take.
Right.
Yeah.
I think people are not, so, I think most times when you ask for anonymous feedback, it's not as scary as it sounds, it's kind of in line with what you think. I think people try to be honest. You might have some outliers, but I haven't found in the things that we've done that are.
Well, if it's gonna be anonymous feedback in any way we collect it, the committee that we set up can decide how to bring that in. Because they're not gonna be, those people won't be committee members, so they're gonna have to decide what they want, what data they want.
Or people may want to participate. There might be some people who feel strongly enough.
Yeah.
Most projects are done that feel like they
Right.
can
And I don't mean to imply that
participate.
everyone was yelling at me that the whole process was terrible.
No,
Yeah.
It's like I've had people say to me, oh, it works so smoothly, but then this happened, and is there a way we can avoid this?
Yeah.
Rather than just like, oh my God, the whole thing was terrible.
Yeah, I'm going through it now.
Which I got a couple of those.
Pretty good experience, so.
So there you go.
And not because I was mayor, I was before I became mayor. It's been going on, it's an endless renovation. You were suggesting, Larry, I think that we might be able to internally identify some projects that didn't go as smoothly as we hoped.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
that happened over the
Or,
years,
yeah,
right?
the building department would say, oh, I don't want to talk about that. They might give you a list of a couple that they think could have gone better.
Yeah.
If we choose to go the way of having a committee spend an amount of time to do an overall review, but we still would like to take low-hanging fruit and piecemeal, approach to certain things, that would require changing laws.
Yeah.
And is it possible that those laws would only be changed for a short amount of time based on the overall review and then be changed again, or is that a problem if we?
Well, it's possible, but it's possible, but I could see on the solar panels, that's not gonna
Right, that
be
seems like
affected
like
much
pretty
by the
low.
process, yeah.
And we've
And
already
and
done
if
that.
and if you have,
You decide, right?
if you do that
Yes.
stuff and there's something the committee recommends that's a little inconsistent, so you just change the law again, it's not a problem.
Thanks.
So, if there aren't other comments on this, maybe you and I sit down during the week or in the next week, try to figure out how to propose something to the group here that would work. Then we can reach out to people in the community who have expressed interest.
And we'll look at the short-term changes as well.
Yeah.
Just let me know.
All right. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, sounds good.
That's it for the live acting for this.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I did tell some of you. It was interesting. To be fair, okay. Discussion of short-term rental laws. So.
So this is one where a suggestion was made to eliminate the provision in the current law, which is that the dwelling unit in which the STR is located has to have been in existence in its present size for at least 5 years prior to the application for the STR. That suggestion was heard by the board. We then turned back to the housing committee and asked the housing committee to weigh in on it, right? And so their feedback, which I think was covered at a previous meeting, but we're just kind of circling back to talk about it, is that they don't see that it necessarily impacts the availability of affordable housing necessarily. And their observation was that the 5-year rule appears unnecessarily onerous, but it wasn't really, they didn't take a strong position on it, I guess.
It's not in there, they said it's not in their, what's the word I'm looking for, well, not really their purview, because they could, if they wanted to, but it's not in their priorities.
Yeah, their main mission, yeah.
So we've talked about, Larry, other limitations within this law that might permit us to let the 5-year requirement go. That it's limited to 50 short-term rentals.
They have to be there 90 days a year, the owners will be there 90 of the days.
Yep.
I mean, I think that specific provision of it, of that law, I mean, you wanna make sure that you're accomplishing what you wanna accomplish, and if you're trying to accomplish limiting short-term rentals, to me, that seems like irrelevant to that point, right? Because homeowners can renovate their homes for many number of reasons. So it seems to me like that's probably the least reason that people will renovate their homes, as evidenced by the fact that there's two short-term rental
Yeah.
licenses. So to me, it seems like a
They're actually registered.
Yeah, right.
We discussed,
Well, you're wondering whether the dam that holds back all those, future applications is 5 years, and I think the conclusion is it's not. You've got it's got to be a single family that you're renting it to, so it's not likely to be, this doesn't open it to a party house just because you have taken away the requirement that it be in the same state for 5 years.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah.
I was gonna say, we discussed this pretty much at length when we passed the other, that was having to do with the limited attached.
For accessory house.
Yes, thank you. And the reason we decided to wait was because it was a different thing, we wanted to get the housing committee to weigh in. The housing committee doesn't seem to object. I mean, my big thing was that, look, nobody wants a block to become an Airbnb block or anything like that.
Yeah.
But, like John said, it's really tough. It's still tough.
Yeah.
And there's no way if we remove this 5-year requirement, which seems kind of almost random. And I understand why it was put in originally, don't get me wrong, but I'm saying right now, as we sit in almost 2024, it seems kind of random that there's plenty here that would prevent any company from coming and saying, we're gonna turn Irvington into a Airbnb hub here. So I'm comfortable with moving on to the requirement.
So would anybody be against just sort of doing a draft of the rate? I don't think it's dramatic change, but.
Yeah, I can have it.
Okay.
I can have it from Monday and you can call it.
Okay. Our next meeting can be.
That's what
Yeah, I know.
December 18th is Monday, in case you were wondering.
Okay. Review of the current noise ordinance.
Okay, well, to go back on a little bit of history for this. So of course, you have an immediate complaint, and I'm sure there's others that have come into the police department, we know that, regarding a particular facility at Hudson Loft. And so this, I realized that 4 out of the 5 board members weren't on the board the last time this actually came up in terms of trying to deal with it. So so there's a history here, and I just wanted to at least give that history to some extent. Yeah, so as I said, back in 2019 is probably the last time we dealt with this. Once the pandemic hit, it all kind of died down, given the nature of the gatherings that were taking place at this facility. But really, we went into the intricacies of the noise law and the noise ordinance under the nuisance law. And Mary could probably do a better job of describing how they interplay with each other. But it's a very subjectively written provision. And so I included on the agenda a copy of the current law. There's really two sections in this particular law that were applicable to this particular situation. We didn't frankly, one of them we didn't really talk about a lot back in 2019, which was paragraph number 7. That relates to noise generated by a business that impacts its neighbors. That's a section that was specifically cited by the recent complaint. We actually spent more time talking about the paragraph number 2, which talks about amplified music, basically. And again, it's a very broadly written paragraph.
Can you refresh my memory? Is that considered waterfront zone?
That is the
I think it's the
business
business
district,
business
which is the same as Main Street, basically.
So that would be picked up as a mixed residential business zone.
Yeah,
I think so, yeah.
I just want to make sure the 7.
yeah, it's covered,
applies.
yeah, 7 does.
Okay.
Right. We were focused on the radios, phonographs, et cetera, using and operating permitting to be played, musical instruments, phonograph, it's, again, very broadly written, in such a manner as to disturb the peace, quiet, and comfort of the neighboring inhabitants, or at any time with louder volume than is necessary for a convenient hearing for the person or voluntary listeners thereto. It then mentions a window of time that by definition is considered unreasonable or a violation of that particular paragraph, which is the time period between midnight and 7 a.m. So if it's midnight and 7 a.m., that's unreasonable if there's amplified sounds, I think essentially is the way it's described. But up to that point, it's fairly subjective. Amplified sound at 8 p.m. is probably differently interpreted than amplified sound at 11 p.m. in terms of whether it's unreasonable or not. Background noise being present, and I think that's the way we were talking about it. We then got into, okay, well, this reasonable provision is troublesome because it's so subjective, and with the police enforcing that, it makes it obviously a difficult job for them. We then got into how to make it more objective, which would involve setting decibel levels with decibel meters that need to be calibrated and training and operated by the police or a code enforcement officer. And frankly, that's where the discussion ended. So I didn't want to give you, there was no punchline to it. We basically just dropped it.
But Larry, let me just add one thing. We were working with sets of numbers. We actually, worked with sets of numbers. And whatever, let's say, I'm just making up a number, 35, let's say a decibel of 35. Seems like it could be too loud. And then the people, board members were going out and testing it when somebody would call in and say, I know Brian went a couple of times, I think you went, to fool around with those numbers, and whatever the numbers were.
What we determined was it really wasn't first of all, besides the issue of having to calibrate an instrument, having to measure where you stand from a property line or a property owner.
We
or
got
within
very
the owner's
specific
house or
about it,
whatever.
yeah, we were.
We also determined that it really wasn't decibels, that there were other aspects to the music that were much more bothersome than what the bass.
bass.
Things, I could stand, Brian would call and say, I'm going down. I'd meet him down there, I downloaded a decibel meter, I would stand by your house, and I could feel it in my stomach, and the numbers were reading, general conversation,
Right.
Give a number that would say general conversation, or loud speaking, but not, airplane coming or train going by.
Right. And
But
this
you
went
still
on,
felt it.
this went on for a long time. I mean, you guys went out there a lot, and then COVID came.
Right, COVID really ended our
It was-
discussion about that, but
But it was, I don't wanna, people worked hard on it, but it was like, couldn't come to a resolution.
Beyond this particular location, do we get a lot of complaints of this nature?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to.
Well, once in a while, I mean, the thing at Villa Loire.
Oh, yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's-
I got it, but that's not a consistent
No, no, I can't say no, and
No,
then,
I'm sure
no.
there's
And then there
probably
was a
been-
party house that isn't anymore.
Yeah.
There'd be
But
some
Marianne,
ways
doesn't
in
number
there.
7 kind of make that even easier, because it says from 7 to 7, making that, like, knowing that disturbs the peace, quiet, and comfort of the neighboring.
But I think when we discussed that issue, that was really more businesses that sort of during business hours were making noise.
Well, that's
You know,
what,
as the
that's what it was
functioning-
designed, yeah,
Right, as the functioning of the business itself,
right.
that we weren't going to allow that business, you know, if they were doing it as part of their business during the day. That was one thing, but we didn't want it happening too early or too late.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
it's not like
definitely,
a place that has affairs and stuff, isn't that their business, they have the music, like, or am I pushing that too far?
Yeah,
I'm
you know
not
what,
sure they
I don't
thought
think we
about it when
I
they
don't
wrote
think
it.
we looked at that. I don't think we paid attention to 7. I think Larry's right that we were paying attention to the radio's phonographs part of it.
I love the phonograph being in the code, that just.
Yeah, I know.
So since this is, well, it's sort of a one-off, before we start trying to change the law to put in sound meters and other things that will complicate the function of the police department, is it worth reaching out to the owners and saying, you got a problem here, before we start legislating to stop it, would you like to do something about it? And perhaps, and I'm happy to send a letter, and then maybe ask them for an introduction to the people who are leasing the space, because it's obviously not, it's not Bridge Street that's doing it. And I'm making an assumption that it's Bridge Street's building, but I think that's what you and others have suggested.
yeah, I mean, the one other point about the way this code is structured, you know, this code doesn't say that when the police show up, they have to shut down. The code says that if they show up, the police issue a violation, that violation gets adjudicated in local court, and the maximum penalty is $50.
Right.
So strictly relying on just this code doesn't get you where I think you want to go, which is to try to make life better for the neighbors.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. I'm not suggesting we're going to be able to get to that point, but at least, you know, but just simply relying on this code doesn't do it. So,
I missed section of the code.
this particular section. So, I think it may take, I think it would be helpful to do a little bit of research, if you're okay with me working with the village attorney to research it a little bit and see if there are any other things that are maybe better deterrents than a $50 fine, for example.
Can we concurrently, what would be?
Yeah, but I think it'd be helpful to know, if there are any other points of leverage
Yeah.
before you talk to the owners.
Gotcha.
That's all, just to get a better idea,
I
so
mean, because
that's,
I'm speaking out of turn because I haven't gone down there when there's a moment when the sound is blaring, whether baffles or something else. As a musician, I know, and a drummer in particular, I got another one on the board. I know that people can be sensitive to the noise I'm making, so I do something to deaden the sound.
yeah, no, I think that there should have the ability to compel an owner to do that. I just want to make sure you know.
I understand you want to give me the best
Give you the best
leverage.
opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
if that's okay, we'll take a look at it, and we can meet with your attorney to discuss what the potential options are.
Yeah, if Monday's not on the agenda, we could do it after the meeting Monday. So we're not talking about dragging it out too long.
Be okay.
Is it worth it, did we already look at like what other communities are doing, like how their laws are structured, or does the chief have any suggestions on
I
how
was gonna
that?
say, we should ask the chief what he needs.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at other laws.
Right, yeah, yeah.
That's where we were getting the numbers from, and
Right.
realized that
Yeah,
these numbers don't work.
They don't mean anything. That's what's hard, like, depending
Yeah.
on.
It's context.
Yeah, that there has to be a better way to do it, and actually, the language there, while very subjective, is closer to aiming, gets to what you want more than a decibel of 35, but,
Also, just as we move forward, just to know, I know we got one letter, but as I mentioned in an email to the board, I just want to make sure we remember, I had someone I know spoke to me, said there's a bunch of neighbors that are organizing a letter to write.
It's a real,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's-
Oh, yeah, no one's.
And there
suggesting-
were a lot of letters before, a lot of people came from that.
I wasn't suggesting there weren't multiple
Yeah.
complaints, it's just that they're emanating from one location. That's all I was
Yeah,
trying to determine.
Do
All
we
right.
know if the operator of the building is the same as it's been since pre-COVID or not?
I don't know, but I thought the answer is yes, but I can confirm it. I don't
The
know.
owner?
Or-
Well, no, not the owner, but the
The
actual
operator.
MC.
Right.
Yeah, the operator of the space, right.
They had come, I think this was while the, noise was being investigated before, they did come to the planning board with an application to, open one side of the building, they wanted to put a deck out there.
It was facing the river, but still. it was-
Yeah, and so that, you know, that there were code reasons that they couldn't do that, so they went away on that. So that was, I think, the last we heard from them before the village.
And I hadn't heard that there was a different operator, but I can double check.
Okay, so we'll talk in the next week or something, yeah, maybe afterwards, after the next.
Yeah, I'll be everybody to talk about it Monday, yeah.
The law and then.
I have some thoughts on it.
Okay. Okay, discussion about future process for the review of the village's facilities. I'm expecting more correspondence on this particular subject, so I'm not rushing to do something. I also, this is personal opinion obviously, but anticipate that interest rates will come down over the next year or so, so rushing to borrow money is probably not the best move for the village. It's more expensive, but there is discussion to be had about what exactly the problem is that we want to tackle first, and is that all facilities, DPW, village hall, fire department, even if they're not all rolled up into one project at the outset, having an idea of how it will be played out sequentially, is that a way to go, or should we just focus on the firehouse? So I'm really looking for opinions.
Having just gone through a police interview process in which we were told that we have capacity for one more female officer and then we can't hire any after that because there's nowhere to put them.
Right.
I would think that we want to look at all the problems.
Okay, that's fair.
I would also comment that the housing committee has spent a lot of time focused on that DPW area and did, I just sent a letter to the board recommending that a committee be formed to specifically look at DPW, recognizing that its location or locations are a little more flexible than the possibility of relocating the fire department.
So should we have separate committees for
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah, because this is as you all learned, I didn't have to be there at the time, but you know, it's an enormous task and you're trying to solve one very large problem, or actually many problems.
But they can or cannot be related, you know? So it's tough. If you make it one committee, at least there can be, you know, conversation about how things interact. If you almost lose that, but then it's more tackleable. That's not a word, but I just said that today. Because you have like more discrete things to actually address, so.
Maybe we should, maybe just to reiterate Larry's point, like it sounds like the housing committees are doing a lot of work on this, and it sounded like from the letter that David sent that they had identified like potential issues and things they were looking at, so maybe it would be worth getting some data, just context that help figure out the next steps.
So we want to pose.
But they dove into the issue from the housing side of it as to what they'd like to see at that site. What they don't have the capacity and didn't have the capacity to do is identify where DPW operations are going to go.
Oh, I thought you were looking, I misunderstood. They said that they've identified a couple of spots for DPW.
No.
No, not, I mean, other than idle conversation, you know.
I thought part of it, sorry, I understood that part of that design was DPW trucks in the bottom. I thought there was some,
I would put that in the category of
not really.
one of the options that could be considered when you're considering where to have your DPW operations.
Okay,
There are others that could be considered. What they are, I don't know. If I had the answers, you'd have them in front of you.
Yeah.
You know, but they could be, the ideal the ideal approach is to not have DPW at that location, but have it somewhere else. I don't know where that somewhere else is, and that's
Yeah.
part of what would be,
I would suggest that if we decide to go the route of having a committee that looks at everything at once, we need to pull sort of everybody who's been through the process one way or another and make sure they brief that committee, whether that's you and Ed and others, and previous committees, if they're not, if there isn't overlap, because there are, I'm sure, many solutions that have been tried that failed for a particular reason. Now, maybe they can be overcome, but the committee ought to know that rather than reinvent the wheel.
You can also, I mean, I think that you need a committee that's gonna work on, I think you need to have an overarching committee that's gonna kind of work together on it as a plan, even if you have subcommittees, like even if you have a big committee and you have subcommittees. I think the police review committee was a giant committee, actually. I think we broke up into 2 groups. But I think and then came back together. I think you can do that. I think that model worked well. And then we came back with recommendations and different, we worked on things. But I think it's hard to silo these things off, right? I think that's hopefully the plan is to kind of have a vision of where we're going in the future, right? And that's gonna be all these pieces and all of us recognizing that the facilities problem is an actual problem that has to be dealt with, right?
And actually, I agree with you, but go one step beyond that is like everybody, when you talk about any problem, it's like, let's talk about the DPW side, we'll find another spot for that. Oh, what are we gonna do with the firehouse? Let's find another spot for that, right? We're a tiny little village, right? So I think until we solve the where in our tiny little village are we gonna put things, every other problem can't be addressed until that's addressed when it comes to these things.
well, and there's also another component, which is to come to the determination of what facilities you need to accommodate.
Sure.
Because not every single function that's performed by the village has to be accommodated by a facility in the village. There's other ways of doing things. Just suggesting, we're sitting in a courtroom, does the village have to have a justice court? I'm not singling them out, we're just happy to be sitting here, The point, that's the type of, so it's not just a matter of moving the blocks around.
That the housing committee talked about in terms of the DPW was sort of siloing what different aspects of the DPW were done and seeing if individual areas could be relocated. Could the garage units didn't have to be where the trucks were stored.
Actually, we're done with your work.
Yeah, you've done it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mary Ann.
Okay.
So I think those are the 2 central driving things. What do we need and where can it go?
Yes.
And then I think if there's any specific question about DPW or firehouse or the police station or any other stuff, can't really be addressed until those 2 things are addressed.
Yes, and it sounds, so based on this discussion, it sounds like looking at things comprehensively as opposed to individual projects, is the approach. Whether it gets broken down into those components as part of a committee, that's fine, but
And, to your earlier point, like, rather than the sort of philosophy behind it, one suggestion to IVAC, working with Dobbs Ferry or some other town might be the same thing we end up doing with certain parts of of the functions that are here, just because we don't have a place to move something.
Well, we tried once with the firehouse, we could try that, right? Like there might, whatever the problems were, it might be different now, I don't know.
Also, by the way, Hastings has a shooting range, indoor shooting range.
I didn't hear that.
Hastings has an indoor shooting range.
Wait, so I didn't mean to change the subject, was there something you just want to say about that?
No, just that in terms of
comes for those 2.
services, I didn't know
Oh,
that they had
supposed
that.
to, yeah. About the, I don't want to get to it, I was gonna say something about the fire.
All right, so I guess more to come. Actually, lots more to come, but we'll wait, because I'm sure we're gonna get some more
opinions on this particular subject, and then we can try to incorporate that and create an approach to start the process, restart the process.
Getting as many people involved as possible, because I think that a lot of times the challenges aren't necessarily apparent if you haven't been in the weeds. You know, so.
And communication would be a big thing, clearly.
Yeah.
To make sure that the number one frustration of anybody on the board, and I'm sure you, the village administration, feels is you think you convey the message and it doesn't, it's not always heard.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And look, and in this instance, I mean, I'm not a big fan of having very large committees because they can be counterproductive, you know, but in this instance, there's a lot of work to do,
Yeah, there's a
so
lot of
I think you're gonna need a lot of help, just my,
And you probably.
and maybe professional help, by the way, so.
That's.
Try subcommittees, right? You'll have to go into subcommittees.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah, and you might be supporting it with professional help, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying, I mean,
Yeah.
people, maybe you'll have enough expertise on the committee, that's great, you know what I mean, if that turns out to be the case, but maybe they'll need architectural support or some other.
Or a professional facilitator just to get the, keep people going.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay. All right.
All right.
I guess
Thank you.
review of operating budget preparation timeline. Sounds like something that.
So I do have, just to kind of have like a starting point, I have last year's timeline. So this is if we followed the same schedule as last year, and then I just kind of adjusted it for these meeting dates.
Oh, thanks.
So this is if we did things exactly the same as last year. So we started out with like the budget overview, where I would go over the tax cap and how much we can increase it, and then the big items like health insurance and retirement costs, some of the revenues, to kind of see big picture where we land. And then the following sessions, we went into the different departments.
So there's not a lot of space to accelerate it unless you're pushing it to the beginning of January, date-wise. But could you? I'm sorry. You clearly you had something.
No, that was pretty
No.
much.
So
That's pretty much it.
I guess the question is, and I get the only suggestion I heard so far was, if we know that we're gonna need to spend more time in some of our larger budgets, so let's just say, not that this is an exhaustive list, but DPW, recreation, police department, I suppose, those are probably your three largest. I guess you could consider the areas under Katie's responsibility, so like health insurance, some of those are bigger numbers, but they're not necessarily unwielding departments, to go through.
There's not a lot of room there anyway, right?
Well, no.
Yeah,
Right, they're big numbers, but not necessarily a lot of discussion points.
right.
Right, she's telling us what is, not for us to
Yeah.
decide, yeah.
So, right,
See
so,
that power.
right, so that suggestion I think that John, you had made was that possibly we would accelerate the consideration of those smaller departments. And I mean, we can enumerate what those are, but we're talking theater and library and, maybe some of Katie's stuff and building department, things like that. Accelerate those, maybe deal with them right up front, possibly in one meeting, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or two at the most, let's say. And then allocate really the rest of your meetings to an entire night devoted to DPW.
There's
Or
gotta be a meeting
recreation.
before January 16th, right?
There is, it's January 4th.
Just as a matter of point, I've mentioned this before, I am gonna be away pretty much for the month of March.
Okay.
So I'm gonna miss the 3 March meetings. I'll be back by March 20th.
Okay, well, look,
So we'll do everything then.
That's what Larry's asking.
No, I mean,
That was your request.
I'll be available by
Understood.
email, but
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
different part of the world, so.
okay.
So, as I recall from last year, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't an easy budget process because of the evaluations and et cetera. But as far as the schedule goes, it ran pretty smoothly. Like I think it's not like we said, oh, this ended up needing more time or whatever. I think this process went smoothly. It was just the substance that was difficult because it was a difficult budget year.
But I also got the feeling, and this is my impression, comments from all of you, is that you wanted more opportunity to
Yes.
get in,
Yeah.
to understand, not just look at the numbers, but look at,
Yeah.
okay, why did they trend a certain way from over a couple of years, and how did you get to, small numbers I'm not gonna worry about, but how did you get to a particular big number,
Right.
and why?
No, I'm not disagreeing. I'm
Yeah,
saying
no, neither am I.
Okay. No, just we can make some changes to make that possible within the structures.
No, but I think and I'll say how I felt about it. I would like the opportunity to look at numbers and say like, okay, this is a labor number, what's in that labor number, right? This is like these items, like everything is put into that, what does it look like in the last 2 years? So that we saw 1 or 2 numbers where there was a number that was there over a period of time. The actuals were very small compared to that number. I think that's what we wanted to be able to look at, right? So I think that's gonna be an information thing.
So if we just get, I know this is like, I'm gonna get things thrown at me from the staff, but can we get the budgets earlier so we can do that, or? Because I forget, were the budgets available at the beginning of the process, or did each group get their budget in before their meeting?
They were not available right up front.
Yeah.
So they were available as the workshops, as we arrived at the workshops.
Right, so is there a way to get them earlier, or does it? Okay, I didn't know if that was.
Yeah, usually, so I plan on sending out the budget request probably by the end of this week, to the departments. When last year I didn't send it out until like the end of December, so that's already pushed, well, I guess not that much, but a week or two. Yeah, so, they can start working on them,
And we've given a preview about the level of detail that's gonna be expected and, because we knew what the board was gonna expect.
Does it make sense, and perhaps you just want to do this as a group, but to have people who are liaisons to particular departments go in and, even if they're conveying questions from other people, really do a deep dive on particular departments? This is for you guys, not for that, but, or would you rather just use the process you had, get the full documents, full budgets early for a department, and then, try to work through them that way?
There was a lot of that last year.
There was.
Yeah, I know I had the whole library explanation as to why they
Okay.
needed to do what they needed to do, and I think other people have things too, right? You're the police liaison, didn't you come in and tell us what Frank was looking for and everything? Yeah, I think there was some of that.
Okay, then, fine.
Yeah, I don't remember, and maybe we did have it, but did we have, I felt like there wasn't a lot of detail. It was sort of a higher level.
Yeah, it
a higher
was.
level review.
It was higher level, and in like the couple past department head meetings, we are trying to encourage them to kind of break out, like any contracts that they have, just like kind of itemize each of the lines. If I distribute maybe what they plan on presenting like at least a week before the meeting, it could give everyone a chance to kind of look it over and prepare questions.
Or we
Even-
can kind of send them ahead of time just so they're
Yeah.
ready to answer.
Yeah, if there's something I need to research or look into, I can do that.
That's why I was asking if we got all the budgets up front in the process instead of when they have their overviews, that would give us more time to do that.
Yeah, I could definitely try and push that up a little bit.
As each department does their budget, presumably you do a first cut, in a sense, do what we're trying to do, and go sit with department heads or people in the departments to go through it? I'm asking that.
Yeah, so they would come up with their requests and then I would meet with them. Last year, the way we approached it is we had like a set dollar amount of what needed to be cut, and then we kind of split it up between the departments, but it didn't really work out that great, so people just didn't stick with it, other people did, and that was kind of just like percentage of budget kind of just applied throughout.
Do you think it would be intrusive if one or more of us sort of rode along for the meetings?
No, I wouldn't mind. I think that would be
Well,
that'd be
you won't,
good.
but they might. That's
Oh, they
that's
might.
the other option.
It doesn't matter.
Okay, I mean, we'll see how it plays out, but that may be also another way for us to at least selectively get enough,
It would
background.
also be good to educate the departments, because I think that they don't always understand, like last year at the library, the library pays its own maintenance on the building, and the library pays its own insurance and whatever with attached to the employees in a way that no other department does, right? Like, so every other department says we have this many people, this is what they make, and then Katie takes care of everything else, right? And the library doesn't. So I don't know if there's a way, I think getting better communication between the departments would help to maybe lower the temperature a little bit on the budget discussions. And, based on last year's experience. So I don't know how to accomplish that per se. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, when we were looking at applying cuts across the departments, we broke out and we identified the discretionary areas within each of their budgets. So a department like the library, although yes, from an accounting standpoint, all the benefits and all that's included in their budget, that wasn't included in their discretionary number that we then applied a cut number to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just in a similar fashion to the police department, where the police department has, a $3+ million budget, but 2.8 million of it is salaries.
Right.
That's not discretionary unless you decide to not have a 24-hour police department. I mean, obviously there's things you can do, but we weren't applying cut numbers to that.
What I meant was that, it kept being thrown up. It's like, the library's getting all this extra money, the library's getting all this extra money. Because if you only look at the bottom line number, not the cut number, but the bottom line number, their number went up. And there was the constant thing, the library's getting all this money, as if the library was getting discretionary extra money,
Well, they were, because they asked for new staff, so it would be, so the benefit part of that, you don't have to ding them for, but the new staff request was a discretionary request.
Right, that was.
So, I mean, it's all semantics, but.
But the civil service thing with the other job, you know what I'm trying to say? These things are complicated, and it's like, I felt like everything got oversimplified between the departments, and I feel like, and as a general rule, it's better if the departments kind of work together, and most of them do, but I think the more we can have that, the better the budgeting process will be, instead of it's like, what did they get, what did they get? It's not about what you get, it's what the village has, and the way the village distributes the money.
I mean, you're responding to a particular situation. I would say overall, I don't think the police department did their budget based on what another department got or didn't get. You know what I mean? So I think that was an isolated situation.
Okay.
But notwithstanding that, we still discuss it at our department head meetings for sure. Everyone kind of knows what the.
I was just saying, I think the more information we can get out there, the better. And look, you're probably right about what you're saying about it being an isolated incident, but you just never know what the next isolated incident is.
Sure.
I think it would be great if we could rearrange, to maybe your point, Maya, some of these, the ones that have the larger, more complex budgets, I would prefer this to have them sooner. That way, if we have questions or think about things later, we have more time before we jump into the draft budget. Plus, Larry will be here, I guess, to get more input. So maybe the Parks and Rec and DPW and, I don't know what else, if we can move those. Yeah, please, yeah.
I mean, I love the library, the theater, but it's like, the budgets are so relatively small compared to where else, just, there's less going on, we can just push those.
For last year where you had certain cuts, do we foresee that happening this year? Are you going in there asking them to cut anything?
That I won't know until I gather all my information for the budget overview.
Okay.
And I know retirement is going up and health insurance is going up and utilities.
And if you're providing something for the ambulance corps.
Yes, that too.
But what about the last year, the big problem was the valuations, from the Greenberg assessor, that the values went up so high that the taxes went up. So what?
Those the numbers from Greenberg on the assessments don't come into the equation on the tax cap. They come into the equation on
How people.
bottom line number, percentage increase, yes. But it actually doesn't affect the tax cap. Tax cap is only based on the levy, not the actual rate.
Gotcha.
So, but the reality is that your residents don't care about the tax levy, they care about their tax bill.
Right.
And it certainly impacts their tax bill. So it's a little bit of a balance.
So we're not gonna know that until into the new year.
I don't even know if do we have our cap number?
No, I mean, I could generate that relatively quickly.
So here's the other one is like the projected revenue, which I think is mostly from building permits, right, for us.
Building permits, Westchester County sales tax, interest revenue.
I think interest revenue this year.
Yeah, definitely.
But we'll have all those numbers.
Yeah, those will be part of the budget overview.
We can project those.
So it strikes me that we've now given you conflicting instructions, which were take the small ones and put them up front,
Well, no, it's,
or take the big ones and put them up front. So I'm not gonna try to solve that problem, but what did you take away from it? Let's go
all right.
with that.
So one observation I have is although I don't at all object to the idea of having the larger departments' budgets in your hands earlier than we otherwise would. So whatever, let's pick a date,
Yeah.
sometime in middle of January, I don't know.
Okay.
The one complication is that those particular departments, well, let's talk about recreation and library even as an example, theater to a lesser extent, they have advisory boards that they work with that have traditionally at least had an opportunity to have a say in what's being submitted as a budget. Doesn't mean they control it, but they
Right,
certainly have a say.
right.
So there's a little bit of a process that plays out there that isn't as quick and simple as saying, having the department head provide you the numbers. So the feeling is we would need to give them a little bit more time than rushing it right up front. So I know that doesn't give you an answer, I'm just saying that's a
Yeah.
factor to consider.
Well, let's do this. I mean, since I think the bigger ones probably don't have that problem, correct?
Well, DPW doesn't have the problem, and the police department doesn't really.
Right, so maybe lead with those. That gives you the chance to give us some input early on. And it may, depending on how much time it takes, and if we get the larger budgets early enough, the smaller ones, you may be able to tack on to some of the hearings. They may be long meetings, but we could be able to do it that way. Maybe one small one at a time with one of the larger ones, if we've gotten the budget of the larger one early enough so that we can get questions in up front.
Well, the time doesn't always match the size, because the DPW meeting is usually like 4 seconds.
Well, but there's a lot to go through now, so it's certainly, yeah, it's not gonna be 4 seconds.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you lined up last year, I bet you the library was longer than DPW.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, well, because we were focused on changes, not focused on the internal workings, so, but I know that's changing, so, all right. Why don't we put together, we'll think about the different factors, maybe talk to
Okay.
the department heads, maybe as early as Monday,
Okay.
and give a proposed set of dates for when budgets can be available.
Okay.
That makes the most sense. It won't be all on one day,
Yeah,
like a Netflix series.
Well, we're not gonna be able to look at them all in one day anyway.
The way I look at it is, I think we've thrown a lot of
What are you
ideas at
talking
you.
about? But no, I just literally watched the whole series the other day on Sunday.
That, I don't wanna speak for my 4 colleagues, but they might agree with me, is I feel like we've thrown a lot of ideas that threw your way, and you should just like take that and
Yeah.
do the best you can. and
I
something
understand
that
what
makes
you're trying to
sense.
accomplish.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a couple more questions though. I'm just curious, when you, and I think we sort of talked about this a little bit last year, but I just wanted to kind of revisit the point. If you have line items and they're not utilized, or it's certain line items that are overutilized, are adjustments sort of, do you like require those line items to change to kind of meet that?
Yeah, this year I definitely want to start doing that, and I did bring that up in our meeting on Monday to kind of look at last year's budget and last year's actuals, and if you used only 10% of a line, don't just leave it, kind of, you know, try and fit your actuals, because that's your need.
As long as we're not creating a use it or lose it
Yeah.
mentality.
Right, yeah, that's always, that's always a problem
That's
too.
just $90,000 expenditure before the end of the year.
Right, yeah.
I guess executive, you got what you need on this for the moment? Okay, I'll make a motion to go to executive session regarding
Second.
two personnel matters.